Hello, everybody. It's Liam Billingham here from Overbusters. We recorded this one a while ago. It's Minnie and Moskowitz. We're very excited to share it with you. As I recall, our energy mirrored that of the film, so it was a bit crazy, a bit rambunctious. We definitely forgot the order of the scenes in the movie. But, you know, we want to give you a visceral experience of the work of John Cassavetes. So we hope you enjoy it. We hope you enjoy it so much that if you haven't, you'll rate, review, and subscribe to the show. You'll tell your friends about it. We really know that if the more reviews we can get, the more people are going to find the show. We're starting to see more people getting into the show, and that's great. So please tell your friends, tell them to download. They don't even have to listen, but just tell them to download. I took my mom's phone over Christmas and downloaded the podcast to her phone. I don't even know if she listened to it. I don't know if she'd get it. She's not what you would call a John Cassavetes fan. Anyways, rate, review, and subscribe. We hope you enjoy the show, and we'll talk soon.
I might be George Fergopoulos.
I might be Liam Billingham.
And this
is
Oeuvre
Busters. I'm George Fergopoulos. I'm Liam Billingham, and this is Oeuvre Busters, and we're talking about whatever movie. But I don't want to do that this time.
I think it's Seymour Cassell's swarthy beauty in this
film.
Movie.
It's
yeah.
really throwing you up. What film are we talking about, George?
So this is
Giorgio?
1971.
You go by Giorgio?
I do all the time. So we're discussing Minnie and Moskowitz
Tonight.
1971, starring the legendary Seymour Cassell and also the legendary Jenna Rollins.
I'm going to stop you right there.
Please do.
Jenna Rollins gets top billing.
She should, actually.
And Seymour Cassell gets second billing. And let's be very careful about that, because I love Jenna Rollins.
She's amazing.
Unbelievable.
She's so good. He's great too, but in a completely different way. And actually, before we, I guess, dive into it, first of all, by the way, my first note the first note I took down was literally, "My God, there's also a ponytail," because in prepping for this movie, I saw the trailer, or maybe I just kind of Googled the film, and I saw some images via
sorry.
It's all good. I was only just talking. I was just talking to our captive audience. And
we've got a bunch of people chained up. So you watched the trailer.
So I watched the trailer. Remember, I took a screenshot of his absurd mustache, and I texted you right away. And I was like, "My God, look at this!"
It's amazing.
Yeah. And then I took that picture around Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and I told all those hipsters.
Have you seen Seymour Moskowitz?
Yeah.
Have you seen him? Yeah, dude.
It's like, you guys think you guys have
Yeah.
mustaches?
Mm-hmm.
Check out what's on this guy's face.
So your first note was about the mustache. No, the first note was about
like, oh my God, there's also a ponytail.
My first note was Universal, because I like the Universal logo that played before it. But then I wrote down
such a shill.
Stash.
Oh, nice! Yeah,
exclamation point. Minnie and Moskowitz. 1971.
Yeah, 1971. So what I just wanted to ask you was,
don't get annoyed when I re-say the date.
I fucking hate dates. So after this, obviously,
and going on them.
This film was after Husbands and before. What's the next one? Is the next one Woman Under the Influence?
Under the Influence. So he makes Husbands. He follows it up with Minnie and Moskowitz in 1971. Husbands is 1970. Minnie and Moskowitz is 1971. Pretty quick turnaround. Probably his highest budget, because Universal was trying to mimic the success of Easy Rider.
I read the John Cassavetes textbook.
Oh, is that on? Did you read that on Wikipedia? Oh, interesting. I read it somewhere else. Next film is we're getting close. The next film is A Woman Under the Influence, 1974. Oof. I might be sick for that episode.
But I wanted to record by myself.
Hi, it's George.
Marty's really going to have to fucking carry his weight on that one, because he's been dead weight for the last 4 or 5 episodes.
We killed him.
Marty, what do you think?
Hello.
That's all he ever says.
It's weird. He's busy.
This guy.
What'd you think of the movie?
I really liked it.
I think this is the best John Cassavetes movie yet.
Well, it was definitely the most entertaining in a way that the other films were not. Although there were still kind of troubling moments, and I did walk away not knowing what to make of like Seymour Cassell's character, in the sense of, yeah, I mean, just like, to what degree we're supposed to be sympathetic to him, to what degree are we supposed to align ourselves with him, because he is a fucking lunatic in this film.
He's crazy.
He's a goddamn lunatic. And also, I just totally forgot what I was going to say, so let's continue.
So, film begins shittily.
Universal.
Because everything about the experience of watching this film was shitty because
we want to talk about that.
This movie. So on Monday, so generally when we go to watch one of these films, I don't know what you do, but about like 3 days or 2 days before I watch them, which is right before I record, I go online and I find them. And so far it's been like maybe one on Amazon, maybe one on Filmstruck, maybe one with my cigarettes.
We're smoking right now.
But I very quickly saw that
just getting the Cassamovies.
I just saw that this was not available anywhere.
Which I was shocked.
Panicked a little bit because 4 years ago, I was into a girl, and she was like, "Let's watch Minnie and Moskowitz. It's on Netflix," and we didn't. I fell asleep. I was like, "Cool." No, not 4 years. 4 years ago is inaccurate. I've been not married, but in a relationship for a lot longer than that.
Edit that out.
I'm old. So several years ago, probably like 2010.
And we'll talk about getting old too, because this film definitely tackles that as well.
It does. So wasn't available anywhere. It was available on YouTube in 2 versions. One, 67 minutes in goes a second out of sync. So it's like, I love you. And then the mouths move. So I immediately found another version, which is what I sent to you, because I was like, don't watch this bullshit posted by this guy. Watch the other one by the other guy, who I'm not going to identify because I don't want it to get pulled.
Right. Good call.
This movie's only available on YouTube right now. That's fucking crazy.
That's crazy,
Or Brooklyn Public Library didn't even have it.
It is also crazy because, again, you'd think that just because of Cassavetes, the name, that it would be accessible and that there would be... It'd be out there somewhere in some sort of kind of like digital version, but...
Well, yeah, YouTube. And also...
I mean,
also not on Filmstruck.
Filmstruck. That's what I meant, yeah.
RIP. RIP today, yesterday. Yeah, but it's still bullshit.
So the film begins with the titular Moskowitz.
Seymour Moskowitz.
Get like a kind of view into his life, and he parks cars.
That's his job. He's a car parker.
And you could tell, well, it's also great because like right away he's already flirting with just random women, which becomes kind of a theme throughout the entire movie. He waves
at a lady.
Yeah, and she's like obviously like kind of like on a date.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
He's very charming. He's very charming from from the start.
I mean, have you seen the facial hair?
I've seen the facial hair.
At first, I was like, "Oh my god, is this some sort of kind of like weird, like Who Framed Roger Rabbit kind of thing?" And that's like supposed to be Yosemite Sam, like animation.
I mean, it's really crazy.
Like humans,
the look,
but it's not.
It's a crazy look. It starts in New York. We're in New York City.
Yes, which also is interesting too, because then it quickly, which I was kind of surprised because at first I was like, "Oh wow, this is going to be great. We're going to kind of get this view of like late 60s, early 70s New York, of like sleazy New York."
Predates Taxi Driver, which is sort of like the iconic 70s film about like
76,
like
77.
I almost said Blitzkrieg New York, maybe not appropriate. Burnt out New York.
Different historical.
So he's parking cars. He's like having a good time. He never stops moving, which is one of my favorite things about this performance.
Oh, that's really interesting.
And it brings me back to the fucking stunt he does at the end of Faces when he runs down the 40-foot hill. I thought about that the whole time watching this thing.
I thought you were going to talk about later on when he kind of like jumps up on his,
that was it. Hands. But I like took a note. I was like, this is just like that scene in Faces when John Cassavetes was like, "Can you do a Mission Impossible Fallout style stunt for my $2 movie?"
And then he's like, "What's Mission Impossible Fallout?" I was like, "Don't worry, it's going to be great."
And that's when we found out that John Cassavetes was the time traveler's wife.
Whoa. Literally way ahead of his time.
So
then the next scene is
in a coffee shop.
Well, no, the film first. Because
that's right. He goes to see the Maltese Falcon.
He goes to see the Maltese Falcon.
Have you ever seen the Maltese Falcon?
I have.
It's fucking incredible.
It is. But it's also really interesting, and we'll talk about it later, but when the film goes to like Minnie's side, it's interesting because there's like a parallel where she's also, like, one of the first things you see her doing is also going to a Humphrey Bogart movie.
Casablanca,
yeah.
Have you ever seen Casablanca?
I have. Is this like, are you like challenged? Have you seen?
No, I just don't know. Some people haven't seen. I haven't seen it in a long time.
I haven't seen it in a long time either.
I thought you liked movies.
What are we doing here?
Boo.
Yeah. You win this round.
Bellingham lowers the blow. So he's watching Maltese Falcon.
He's watching Maltese
Falcon. It's an interesting scene that it's the betrayal scene with Mary Astor.
Yeah. And it's kind of also, I mean, I read it as, especially in light of the next scene, as him kind of, I don't know, obsessing over a certain kind of like masculinity, or being interested in a certain kind of like masculinity.
Who, John Cassavetes or Seymour?
Well, both. Seymour too.
But in this case, you're talking about the character.
The character, yeah.
Okay.
And then it cuts to, which is like one of the first kind of like amazing scenes.
Oh, it's an amazing scene.
Yeah.
Goes to a diner.
It also almost made me throw up too, and I'll tell you why in a second. So he's at this diner, and he's talking to this random guy named Morgan.
Played by the incredible Timothy Carey.
Yeah.
Who's an amazing actor, who also is in...
he's in something else.
He's in Chinese Bookie. He's in Chinese Bookie. God, I can't wait for you to see Chinese Bookie.
I have not seen it.
Oof.
I'm excited.
But anyway... yeah, they have this long conversation.
They do have, they do have a long conversation. And it gets really intense at some point. And this guy Morgan at some point is like, oh yeah, my wife died, so it's just like me, like in this walk-up apartment.
Did you think he maybe was like homeless at first or something? Like the way he just like has this, or schizophrenic, or there was something really wrong with him?
Oh, I thought maybe there was something wrong with him. But not anything more wrong with him than what might be wrong with Seymour.
Yeah, this movie does not paint a great portrait of masculinity.
It does not. Well, as usual. And then there's this really intense thing. So they're like talking or something, and like Morgan's like, "Hey, you want to hear a joke?" And like Sal says, like, it's like, "Hey, tell me a joke, but don't treat me like a joke." And he like slams the table, and like shit goes flying.
And then Seymour hits the table, but no one reacts.
No one reacts.
I expected that sort of to be. This is my expectation of a movie now, and one of the things that I love about this movie is John Cassavetes is quite good at upending.
Yes.
Expectations.
Yeah, totally.
You expect the whole place to flip out and everyone to be paying attention, but like this movie takes place in some other universe where people can just get away with doing.
Well, he also like yells at the waitress because she comes over and she takes his order, and he's like, she's walking away, and he's like, "You didn't get my entire order." It's like, well, he just also,
by the way,
like, yells like a
fucking madman. Top 5 orders of all time.
A hot dog.
A hot dog that he shares,
which is the part that almost made me throw up. He literally takes a bite out of this hot dog or two.
So Seymour orders a hot dog,
and then Morgan.
Hold on, we're not done with this incredible order because it's an amazing order. A hot dog, a coffee, and a beer.
And I think she says like,
this guy has no interest in hydration station. He's staying clear of hydration station.
Asks him, she's like, a coffee and a beer, and he's like, yeah,
that's right, correct. That's correct. I'm Max's dad 40 years from now.
She's like, I'm just trying to look out for you, bro. Like,
I know I'm like an angry waitress who can't literally take the time to take your order, but you want a coffee and a beer? That's something I would order.
At some point, I was like, "Oh my god!" Like Seymour's like a walking like negative Yelp review because he's always yelling at like service industry people. I'm like, dude, calm the fuck
Which is
down.
a great moment to pause and talk about that.
About our new sponsor, Yelp.
AngryYelp.com.
Ever order something and be pissed at random strangers?
All the time.
No,
at Yelp. I feel like that's an Amazon thing.
You can find. No, are you kidding me? People like always just rail on poor like service.
I don't go on Yelp that much. Yeah, it's the place to be. Yeah, well, the internet's bad, but.
You know what's not bad?
This gin and tonic I'm drinking alone.
So then
This movie, has the worst portrayal of men, and then any John Cassavetes movie.
No,
this movie like sticks it in.
Worse than Husbands?
Yes.
I don't know if that's true.
Well,
because the other thing I also wanted to say too is that this is I laughed my ass off during this film.
Well, I laughed my ass off in Husbands too. I mean, it's a funny movie. But yeah, there's a different. This is a funnier. This is a comedy. This is the first comedy we've got.
Yeah, and there are lots of funny moments, which is, which is kind of new.
Do you feel like this movie's about being lonely?
Aw, are you trying to tell me something? Come here, I'll give you a hug. Come here. Yeah, in the sense that all of his films are about being lonely.
But this one's really like the loneliness just like casts a long shadow over this thing.
I don't know, but again, I don't know if more so than the other ones.
Really?
Yeah,
you're wrong.
I could be.
No, I don't know, but I feel like
before.
From an early frame, I don't really. I think Husbands.
Marty's nodding his head. He seems to agree with you.
Marty, just no. Oh, thanks, Marty. Wait, what? No, I don't have cocaine. We don't have cocaine.
Marty, you're like 80 years old.
You have to stop.
Chill.
We need you to make more movies.
You're a national treasure.
Silence is incredible. Did you?
God,
I know I asked you this before,
wait,
but
hold on. He's just giving me a back rub right now. Just really want to.
I'm actually a little tense.
Get in on this. So, is this film about loneliness? I mean, Morgan's definitely lonely, and there's this kind of
Morgan is the guy, the Timothy Carey
guy,
part.
yeah, who again says that his wife died, and I believed him. I think he was being sincere. I don't think he was necessarily like somebody. I just think he's kind of troubled in the way that so many.
Did he start quoting from Shakespeare?
Oh yeah, no, but that was great too. He says something like, I forgot exactly what the context is, but he says something along the lines of, first of all, he also like, in a very kind of problematic way, like turns to like Moskowitz. He's like, "What ethnicity are you?"
Oh yeah, that's right.
And he's like, "I'm Welsh." He's like, and then he says something about kind of,
who says they're Welsh?
Morgan.
I drank that a little fast.
You destroyed that. Didn't have a chance. And then I forgot what the context is.
Let's be clear, we're recording at night for the first time, and I think it's having a bit of a loopy impact on the show.
That's why I went for the coffee.
Are you guys into this, guys? Check this out.
Whoa!
Now I have an icy seltzer.
That's
with a
amazing.
tiny bit of gin.
At some point, Morgan says something like, I've read Shakespeare, Shelley, Swinburne," and he quotes some other kind of ridiculous.
Can I ask you a question?
I don't know what the context
Who's
is.
Swinburne?
I believe. Geez, now you're putting me on the spot. I believe a romantic poet, but I forgot exactly English too. I'm pretty sure. I wonder what the John Cassamovies encyclopedia has to say about this.
So it's interesting because this scene, because we've all been in situations where we've been minorly or majorly accosted by a strange person in a public place, and not to this extent necessarily, but that scene leaves you pretty sympathetic to Seymour.
It does,
because to this point in the film, he's just a guy that parks cars and goes to movies with a little bit of a temper, but like it's not completely unwarranted in this moment in the movie. But then he goes to a party, starts to talk to
a bar.
A bar. But it's such a weird scene.
It is a weird scene.
You're like, is he at a party? Has he been invited to this party? Like, there's a really great sense of dislocation in this movie, and the editing is such that you enter and exit scenes without a lot of context. It feels very contemporary. And part of what works is that you're like, what is he doing? Why is he going to these places and giving people a hard time? What's his deal?
So then he goes to this bar and he just starts randomly going up to all these different women and saying like, "Oh, I know you. Don't you know me? Don't you remember me?" It's like,
and
Seymour.
The first woman he goes up to looked like the woman he hits on in the car.
Oh yeah, good.
So
point.
I was like, I thought it was the same woman. So I was like, that makes sense.
I thought he was like blowing up her spot. I felt like they had maybe like legitimately at some point hooked up, and then obviously the rest of the scene plays out.
But nothing is explained, and his behavior is very schizophrenic and strange.
It is. So he basically walks to this bar, goes up to all of these different women who are clearly with other men, and basically repeats the same thing like, "Oh, hey, I know you. Don't you remember me? Seymour." And he's, I don't know, like if he's looking for a fight, because he does get into a potential fight, but he quickly also runs away.
He's into a fight with a couple black guys, right?
Well, it's also kind of, and it's also like shittily racist, because then he calls the guy like Muhammad, as in like Muhammad Ali.
Yeah, that's right.
Like taps him on the, I forgot, like he taps him on the back, and he kind of like puts up his fist or something, and then the guy goes after him and like he
beats the shit out. I think
he runs out.
Oh, that's right, he does. But he's gonna get the shit kicked out.
Yeah. So then he wanders into another bar, and I'm pretty sure this is the same bar from Husbands. And there's a woman.
The bar from the beginning of, or the crate drinking scene.
Yeah,
Husbands, right.
Which I don't think it literally is, but I'm just saying it looks a lot like it. And he starts flirting with some of the women there. And one of them, I think I guess it's an Irish bar, like legitimately Irish in the sense of.
And he starts talking with a brogue.
Yeah, he starts talking with an Irish accent.
Oh, like, Jesus.
And he says to her like, "Oh,
how's my brogue? Should I do it for the rest of the?"
If I close my eyes, I'd swear it'd be. It was James Joyce. Can you just read Portrait of the Artist for me?
My copy's at the laundromat.
Swinburne, by the way, is definitely more Victorian than a romantic.
Just kidding. I don't mean to be an anti-intellectual.
It's okay.
Have you read anything by Swinburne?
No, I would have known a little bit more about him. I just vaguely knew that he was English, and I was right.
Swinburne is a very English name.
I'm just going to pat myself on the back for that.
Do you want me to get in there?
Oh yeah, thanks. Oh, thank you. Marty's still working my shoulders, but that also feels good.
Not only your shoulders.
Oh.
Risky. Parental advisory. Explicit lyrics.
There is an E on the podcast.
Is there an E? No, I think you did the thing where you put like explicit language.
That's what I mean. There's an E on the podcast.
So when you say E, let me bring you back to the 90s when E stood for everyone on Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo games. There was E, and then there was other ratings. PG. GA.
I don't think there was a GA, yeah.
GA for Aladdin was GA.
General
I played
audience.
the GA, the Aladdin game.
On Super Nintendo?
On Sega Genesis.
Oh, yeah, the Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was a Nintendo guy.
I was a poor. I'm just kidding.
I was a poor.
I had a Sega Genesis.
I was a lowly chimney sweep, and I only had a Sega Genesis.
My Sega Genesis only had 16 bits.
I only had Mortal Kombat 2.
Ooh, good game.
So then he's hitting on this woman.
Should we talk more about Night Trap?
Oh, God.
Jesus Christ.
Well, that's on our fucking Night Trap podcast.
That's
right.
right.
It all the way.
Night Trap cast.
Which is behind our Night Trap Patreon. And for $100 a month, you can listen to us talk about Night Trap over and over and over again.
So he hits on these women.
So he hits on this woman, and here's where he gets his ass kicked, where these guys are
That's right.
get the fuck out of our bar. Possibly because you're doing a racist Irish accent.
Yeah, he's kind of a racist. Well,
sure.
Yeah. Again, another kind of interesting allusion to white ethnicity.
Yeah, that's right.
Which we talked about on our recently released Too Late Blues. That's right. We started releasing episodes, George. How's that going for you? Are you getting recognized on the street?
Actually, okay. So this is a great time also to thank our fans. Like it's
crazy.
Three consecutive nights sold out at Madison Square Garden.
That was nuts.
We are
just
touched.
Thank you so much. Those weren't for us. Those were Radiohead concerts. But we tried to get tickets.
We
couldn't get them. Yeah, we couldn't get tickets. Wow. So he gets beaten up.
He gets his ass
kicked.
And
as maybe a consequence of this, he decides to move to California. But not before visiting
his mom. Who doesn't really... When she comes back,
is John Cassavetes'
his
mother.
Mom, yeah. Marty, what do you think about that? What do you think about casting moms in films?
Marty, have you seen Italian American, the documentary he made about his parents?
No.
Send it to you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, I won't. I'm lying.
Worth watching?
Yeah, it's like 20 minutes long.
Oh, all right. So yeah,
he made it when he was like young. What are we doing? This isn't the fucking Martin Scorsese podcast.
I could definitely find time in my
Is anyone still listening
to watch.
You seem to. Yeah, maybe.
He gets his ass kicked. He goes to his mom. He has all these flowers. He's actually dressed up in a nice suit. He looks presentable.
He does look good. He wears a tie a lot in this movie.
And he tells her, he's going out west, which is also really kind of interesting because, again, I did not expect it to happen because I thought this was going to be a New York-based movie. But also, it's kind of interesting as this kind of, I guess, traditional American trope of people who go west to kind of rediscover themselves.
I would not have made that connection. I thought a little bit, though, about how John Cassamovies. Welcome to John Cassamovies, a new podcast about John Cassavetes movies with your hosts, George Megapoulos and Liam Billingham. But I would have liked a John Cassavetes movie that wasn't about L.A. or New York.
Ah, that's interesting.
He has an interesting relationship. Having seen some of the later films, Husbands is about Long Island, where he grew up. And London, but much more
mainly
like sort of alienated from the suburban lifestyle. But then L.A., there's a lot of you could sort of retitle these because Woman Under the Influence is California, I believe. Killing of a Chinese Bookie is California. Opening Night is not. Opening Night might be Ohio. Can't remember. Anyway, just interesting to think about how he relates to these places in different ways, and especially when you get to Killing of a Chinese Bookie, because that's like a sun-drenched movie, but it's a John Cassavetes movie.
Yeah. So did this film feel to you when it kind of moves to California like it was a very California movie?
California.
Oh,
it's the second time. It's a fun fact.
Last
that's the second time I've done that today.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I saw a buddy today, and he was like, "Oh, we're going to California," and I went, "California," and he was like, "Oh, when I was whatever age, I bought that album because I thought the lead singer was cute."
Yeah.
I was like, we all did.
Wasn't he in a Gap commercial at some point?
I don't know. Don't ever bring the Gap up again on this podcast.
Sorry.
Gap killed my mother.
Brings up really bad. It's like, one day I'll pay them back.
So he goes to California.
And he's on the plane.
And these scenes.
These
scenes are crazy. A mother trying to feed her daughter, and she's like awful to her daughter. And the daughter hits him in the face.
Yeah, so basically he's sitting next to this mother and child. The mother just keeps screaming to the child, like, you gotta eat something.
Food.
You gotta eat something. You gotta. And yeah, she's being awful to the kid. And then
she's like, you won't grow up to be big and strong and pretty.
And at some point she turns to Seymour, and she's like, hey, can I get your help with this? And he's like, sure. And then he picks up a carrot and he starts chewing it.
What's up, Doc?
Yeah, and that's why I also like the Bugs Bunny thing. So he's definitely supposed to be Yosemite Sam. So he's eating the carrot.
Interesting fan theory.
And then the kid just like smacks him in the face, and the carrot comes.
And then it cuts really quickly. It cuts away from that.
Well, she apologizes though. The mom find a second to apologize, and then the plane lands. But clearly, also I read that scene as him trying to, or like Cassavetes showing us that there's maybe some sort of kind of affinity. That he's also like always like just a child at heart.
You think so? I think you're reading too much into it, maybe.
So
I don't mean that critically, but
what the fuck was that scene doing? Please tell me.
Man, this podcast is tense when it's nighttime. George is just like pounding a lot. Why are you drinking a latte at 8:30?
That's how I roll.
I wonder.
I'm gonna write a book tonight.
So this is two things that I want to talk about here. I think I brought this up in the Shadows episode, but I think it's worth coming back a little bit. I feel as though, or I feel so many feelings, but I think that John Cassavetes has really been over intellectualized.
Huh.
And part of the reason I bring that up is I was reading, I think it was a review of this film or a film by Roger Ebert. Mm-hmm. He makes an interesting point, and I think this point is worth thinking about in reference specifically to the period and era and the kind of people he made films with. But like maybe it was actually Richard Brody. I put my hands up as to be like, he's a really strong chronicler of like middle class life in a way, like especially with this film, and I think Husbands, like middle upper class life. Faces is a little trickier, but like there's this great quote of his that's like, most people don't know what they want. I don't know what I want, and we're just flailing about in existence all the time. And I don't think that he ever probably spent a lot of time being like, is there an echo of this? Is there an echo of Seymour's personality in this child? I think he just was smart and had the ability to be like, this is an interesting pairing. I think he probably walked into a scene and was like, what if I have a really irritating mom and kind of pissy kid in a scene with this guy who's kind of been established as a little bit volatile? Yeah. So it's like, I think that part of the thing is that like, maybe there wouldn't be such a maybe the relationship to these films wouldn't be so like, they're so, if we weren't all like trying really hard to over intellectualize and make John Cassavetes about something that he's not. Does that make sense?
To some degree. I mean, yeah, sure. Maybe I'm reading too much into this scene.
I don't mean to suggest that at all.
Right.
I think it's a valuable assessment to make, but I wonder, I guess I'm curious about the difference between intent and interpretation.
Right. No, totally. I think that's fair. So you didn't get the echoes in this scene, though, that like prefigure the eventual coming of perestroika in the late 80s? Like,
no, I feel like George, I'm not an idiot. I'm not a common man.
I felt like it was so prophetic. I was like, oh my God. Like,
no, I think
all there. Gorbachev,
to come back to your point, it's not that I think you're necessarily overthinking it. I think culturally people have really overthought these films. I don't mean to suggest that like he's not a dynamic filmmaker with ideas, but I think that like the ideas come secondary to the emotion and the character, and the story comes lower than all those things, which makes it frustrating a little bit to watch his movies sometimes. But I think he's just about like collision, not really even storytelling.
That I agree with, but I think also in the fact of how any sort of film obviously has to be made in terms of like reflection through like the editing process.
Yeah.
So like they're like I think you're totally right in the sense like he's definitely like, I'm sure there's tons of obviously unused material. Thankfully, we will never find.
I'd watch
the light of day.
All of it.
The light of day, which is funny too, because I was at some point. It's not too long of a film. It's 2 hours.
It's actually shorter than Husbands.
It is shorter
by like it's shorter than Husbands by about 15 minutes, and it's shorter than Faces by 45 years of my fucking life.
But also, there are moments when I'm like, did we really need like that scene? Did we really like? For example, obviously, we won't talk about it, but the scenes with Cassavetes himself, the one scene in particular where he goes back home, and we get a very, very brief view.
I love that scene. I love that scene. Let's get there.
So then we cut to...
You're like, why do you love that?
So it turns out there's snakes on the plane, but thankfully Seymour diffuses the situation. The plane safely lands. Quickly cut to Jenna Rollins
watching Casablanca.
And I think this is like really interesting because, again, she's kind of watching the romantic Bogart juxtaposed with a kind of like the masculine, like controlling Bogart,
the Sam Spade versus the Rick, whoever, the sort of romantic Casablanca. Yeah. But it's also in the end of Casablanca when they sort of say like it's not going to work out between us.
And she's hanging out with her friend Florence, and Florence is fucking amazing because then they go back to Florence's place after the film.
They get smashed. They get smashed. It's amazing.
But also. But it's great because Florence says something like, "Oh, just go to the fridge and get something to eat if you're hungry." She opens the fridge and she's like, "There's nothing here.
There's nothing in your ice box."
And she's like, "Do you have any eggs?" And she's like, "I don't have any eggs." She's like,
"I have wine. I have wine."
And she's like, "Do you have something like I can eat? I have wine." we can have some wine. It's like, how about some wine, Florence?
It's such a good scene. And then they get shit-faced.
The conversation they have is amazing.
Amazing. It's such a good movie.
So the conversation, do you want to talk about the conversation they have about kind of...
I want to talk about the movie, The Conversation. Do you want to talk... Have you seen that?
I've not.
Dude.
Bertolucci. R.I.P.
No, that's sorry, I covered.
Oh, The Conformist.
That's The Conformist. The Conversation is a Francis Ford Coppola movie. So Florence and Minnie get wasted.
Yes, and they have
on some red wine.
Some shitty red wine. And they have this really interesting conversation about the movies and about masculinity.
Tell me more about that.
So Minnie is complaining about I guess the dating scene, but she also has this really kind of like, it begins with her asking Florence something, which is kind of a brutal thing to ask somebody about, kind of like, oh, do you still desire people?
Do you still want to get boned?
Yeah, do you still want to get boned?
Do I say boned too much?
No, you can never say boned too much, especially on a podcast.
Because I was listening to
on a GA podcast.
So they get wasted,
and she asks her, do
you feel desire anymore, Florence? Which is a fucked up thing.
Which is fucked up. Yeah, like, Florence, you're so fucking old. Do you feel desire?
No, we don't know this at this point, but Florence is the secretary at LACMA, where Jenna Rollins works.
Do they call it LACMA?
They call it Los Angeles County Museum,
they do,
which is LACMA, and it looks like LACMA.
And then
if it looks like a LACMA, it sounds like a LACMA.
It's definitely
LACMA.
So then they have this really interesting conversation about the movies. Well, I mean, what Jenna Rollins' character Minnie says is basically kind of like, oh, it's not like how it is in the movies. The movies feed you lies. It's all kind of romance.
Is this John Cassavetes' first treatise that we've gotten? Like, he's not a guy that generally espouses a point of view in so many words. Like, when you think about in Shadows, there's never a scene where it's like, you're a racist, Tony.
Yeah.
And there's never a scene in Too Late Blows where it's like, your masculinity got in the way, Bobby Darin. But in this film, it's the first time you have a movies are garbage and they're lying to you kind of thing.
This might be... Yeah, I guess. I mean, again, I don't quite remember, but this might be the closest we get to kind of a manifesto within the film itself.
Yes, exactly. It's a great speech. I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. Then they have this kind of interesting back and forth. And Florence also says some interesting things. She said something like, I need him now more than ever, or something. Like, it's a very kind of frank conversation also about sex.
Yeah.
And also,
is Florence single?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, of course.
Well, I mean, I'm just spitballing here. Just trying to record a podcast show, improvised podcast show with you.
We're just recording one episode at a time.
What? So then she gets very drunk, and I'd like to pause here and say,
she says, I
so
think movies
couple
are
things.
Conspiracy.
Is this the first time that we have a scene in a John Cassavetes movie between two women? That is not... So the only other scene I could think of between two women in a fucking John Cassavetes movie is the scene between Marilyn Clark and... what's her name in Child is Waiting? When she's like, this is Burt Lancaster's office. That's the only other scene that's just between two women that I can think of.
Oh, I thought you were also going to talk about the scene with Jenna Rollins as the mom in that movie and...
Judy Garland, yeah. So those scenes. But those scenes are all built around plot device or moving the story along. This one kind of stops and lets us spend time with two women.
I didn't write it down, but I was like, oh my god, this scene passes the Bechdel test. Although maybe not entirely too, because they are in this kind of some sort of abstract way talking about their love lives and they're obviously super straight. But there are also kind of interesting kind of conversations about movies and about love.
Right. And the context that it takes place in is really interesting because it's two women who've gone to a movie together and get drunk. And part of the reason that I think that the toxic, shitty masculinity shines through in this film so clearly is because we have a contrast to it, which we don't have in Husbands. We do a little bit with the women, but they have the women in Husbands, but they don't have the same degree of agency.
Correct.
And they don't have the same sort of
well, the women in Husbands aren't really characters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, they're kind of...
Well, that one woman, I forget what her name is.
We have no sense of what... I mean, I don't even think we can say motivation or goals because I don't think that's a John Cassavetes thing. I think that's a trope of a much more traditional filmmaking method, but we don't have an insight. We don't haven't spent time in the mind and a feeling of a character the way that we do in this film we don't have a scene. This is the first scene in a film where we have a character that's I'm going to talk about what I think. And it's really refreshing, but then it makes the fucking terribleness of the men.
Oh, then, yeah. And the next scene in particular. Yeah. So then she leaves. She gets in a cab. She's obviously wasted. She goes back home, and then Billy's there, and who I thought was kind of her husband, as played by... Well, I mean, it is played by her husband
unbilled
in real life.
role, John Cassavetes.
Yeah, and I thought initially they were married, but it turns out they're not married. And he, of course, because this is a John Cassavetes movie, and we're only 27 minutes in, there has to be some violence against a woman. He smacks her, and he basically says kind of like, "Oh, don't lie to me about what you were doing, or about when you're kind of drunk."
Yeah. But
and then she kind of fights back.
She kicks the shit out of him.
She does, yeah.
And it's great because, you know, I don't know if this is something that would have happened in a John Cassavetes movie prior to this. Like, this is a great performance from Jenna Rollins because it is a better character than any woman in a John Cassavetes movie up to this point because, like, she's not a victim in the same sense. It's just a much more, like, the fact that she fights back is like a big, like, rousing kind of like,
It is, but she's also still, and she says it repeatedly, that she's still in love with him up until like the very, very end. She still kind of has feelings for him. So then they have this kind of obviously like, you know, totally awful back and forth. Yeah, so she starts hitting him back. He even like falls on his knees. He starts laughing, and he basically says like, "Oh my God, I love you so much. I love you so much."
Yeah, his laugh is amazing. He's amazing. He's so good in this. He's so good. He's such a good actor. Yeah.
And then they spend the night together.
Let's spend the night together. Da, 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 da,
and you were worried about us getting sued with the Ghostbusters thing?
Oh, yeah.
So they spend
that was a original composition. George wrote it.
They
sings it to me all the time.
They spend the night together. And then it cuts to and this is apparently your favorite scene in the film. You see Billy, again as played by John Cassavetes.
His name is Billy.
Yeah, go back home, and he's married. He is married, and he shows up in the morning. His wife's been like sitting there smoking.
Amazing single take scene. And one of the reasons I love this scene is the single take.
That's a good point.
They're sitting at the table. He comes, he sits down. They have a conversation. She walks out. The kids come in, and he's talking to the kids, and one of them says like, "Mom's on the the bathroom floor
crying."
But it's a single take, and it's a really controlled take, and we don't have anything else like it. And whenever the film like making these films like kind of comes through, I'm like, damn.
So you like the artistry of the scene.
Yeah,
basically.
and I also think it's just a very John Cassavetes move to be like, let's spend some time with... Because his movies are all, at least from my point of view, they're very experiential, and like, he's not, like, so pull this scene out of the film. So the next time we see him is with his son.
At the
museum. Later in the film, very soon after this, he comes to the museum and he's like, I want to be a man and break up with you in front of my son. And
he says, because my
wife tried to kill herself, and it just wouldn't hit in the same way.
No, you're right.
We didn't have the context of the people and the family, and like, again, unpredictable. It's a very unpredictable movie. The rhythms of it. It's probably the clearest sort of, to me, like the I don't know if it's the clearest, but there's a moment in the film when I think that this film is like probably the easiest to digest of like the Cassavetes style.
Yeah. Which is funny because...
And it's so refined in this film.
One of the things I was thinking about when I was watching this, like, wow, this film feels very contemporary. Not obviously modern, because all film is modern, but it felt like very contemporary. Like, it didn't feel... It feels very... I agree. Yeah, in a certain way that some of the other films do not. So then she goes back to work. Minnie does. And she works at the Los Angeles County Museum.
LACMA. With the tar pits. All featured prominently in Last Action Hero, a film we'll cover when we get to John McTiernan.
Of course. Who will?
Hey, Claudius,
Cassavetes.
You killed my father.
Oh, yeah,
Big mistake.
When are we going to see Arnold do Hamlet? I think he's
What's the line in the trailer?
He's at the age you could be, to be or not to be, to not be.
There's a line, not to be. There's a line in the trailer where he goes, "There's something rotten in the state of Denmark, and Hamlet is taking out the trash." Hey, Claudius. Not to be.
How do we get sidetracked?
That's not a sidetrack. Can I just before we go a little further,
Please.
Can I read a note to you that I wrote down here to get your thoughts on?
Yeah.
And I'd like to get the thoughts of our listeners as well.
All three of them.
It's 4. My mom listened to the first episode. Yay. She was like, I don't know who John Cassavetes is. I don't want you hanging out with
this George boy anymore.
He seems nice.
Who's this Cassamovies you keep talking about?
Is the reason that is it the performance that makes Minnie great, or is it the script? Like, what is... I mean, and I think it's both. Like, when reading that loud, but, like, there's something about this character that is just amazing.
Well, it's so funny when you were talking about that. When you were talking about the scene right before where she beats the shit out of him after he hits her.
Great scene.
I was like, I wonder if that's her. If she's like, no, we need to kind of put something in that scene where she's not taking kind of his shit.
I would love to watch. There might be one a making of, because there's a making of Husbands that I want to watch, but there's a making of where I'd like to see Jenna Rollins and John Cassavetes working together, because I could see her being like, John, shut the fuck up.
Shut up, John. Totally.
Shut up.
Yeah. I wonder what that working relationship was like, because something tells me, and obviously this is kind of true, right, from the very little that I know of him as a filmmaker, like on the set, that he was very receptive to just kind of having the scene like develop.
That's Spielberg's story, I told you.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
So she goes back to work.
She goes back to work, and Florence is like, you're going to go on this lunch date because you're a lonely person. Like, I'm a lonely person, with this guy, Selmo.
Who is what's his last name?
Incredible. I don't know. Selmo the Incredible, I believe. Incredible, like in the worst possible ways.
So she goes on a lunch date with this guy.
He is horrible.
And what follows is one of the best scenes.
I wrote, God, this is so cringeworthy.
Of any film I've ever seen.
So they go...
And I say that not that lightly, because it's also a very troubling scene. Sorry.
So they go to a diner.
Yes.
Or a restaurant, whatever. Who's parking the cars? Dun, dun, dun. Seymour.
Seymour, and suddenly Seymour. I'm singing too much in this episode.
Has there been a podcast, an episode that you have not?
I don't think I sang in the first one.
So he parks their car. They go inside for lunch.
I forgot to bring something up.
Please do. Go ahead.
Okay. Before we go any further.
Rewind.
John Cassavetes. Not a good-looking man. But in any traditional sense. And I was thinking about this during the scene. But he's sexy. Like, he does it for me.
Yeah. No, totally.
There's really something like sort of like
Well,
handsome, and he's not good.
Well, because it's that kind of like alpha male bullshit that kind of
is
works.
that what it is? I also think.
Okay.
I also think, I don't know. There's something just like.
Well, it's like the strutting, like the powerful kind of like.
But he's kind of a schlubby dude.
Well, yeah, I mean,
but he wears a suit like a motherfucker.
Yeah, like in the dad body kind of sort of way. He's got a dad body.
How dare you? No, I find him very attractive. He does it for me. There's something about him that's very like. Well, I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Just a side note on the fact that I might have sexual feelings for John Cassavetes. It's fine.
It's all good. Moving on. So they're having.
Here's the thing. You date John Cassavetes. You marry Jenna Rollins.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Later, when we do 3 directors, we'll do F, Marry, Kill. Like John Cassavetes.
F. John Cassavetes.
We don't know who the next person, but like John Cassavetes.
The next person is one of the people we're thinking. I'm not doing anything with any of those people. To be continued.
Selmo
and Minnie go to lunch. Cars parked by Seymour Cassell.
Selmo is angry. So apparently a friend of Florence's. They actually briefly meet. We see them briefly meet in the museum before they go to lunch.
And he's very charming in the museum.
Very charming. Yeah, I guess so.
He says something very charming, and it kind of like,
oh, you're beautiful.
And you're so invested in her at that moment.
He says something along the lines of, like, I'm 5'6". Let's go to lunch. Literally, that is like an exact
but it's sort of disarming, because you're on this journey in this movie. You're just kind of like going along for the ride, and like you feel for Minnie, and so it's kind of nice that suddenly she's just like, oh, this means like it could be an okay lunch date. Maybe I'm not. I'm probably naive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Oh, maybe I'm wrong. Isn't it? So maybe it's Selmo that says like my interests are Shakespeare, Shelley, Swinburne, poetry, opera.
He does say that. He does say
that. So that wasn't Morgan.
It's interesting to note that we're about 4 minutes into this film and 46 minutes into recording.
Jeez. So
wrap it up, boys.
They have this lunch. He says a whole bunch of awkward things. He also says that his wife has passed away and that he's feeling lonely. He also says that he's got hair on his chest and on his back, but his legs are smooth.
Yeah, that's right.
Basically, it's an awful.
He goes on
lunch.
a long, terrible tirade.
She's wearing her amazing shades during this, and we should also talk about her shades.
We should talk about her shades. They left me flummoxed.
I just kind of viewed it as this way to express the fact that she doesn't want to communicate with people or just kind of see them eye to eye.
But it upset me because I like Minnie so much.
Yeah, and her you just didn't want to see her unhappy.
I love Minnie. She's my favorite John Cassavetes character.
She then basically says to him after again like a cringeworthy turn of 15 minutes, like, this isn't going to work out. I like you, Selmo. Like, she says something like, I like you as a person, but I don't feel anything for you.
By the way, it's about a real 15 minutes. It's a long chunk of this movie.
Yeah.
It's probably a 20-minute scene.
And he again vacillates between being somewhat sympathetic and being a tyrant. She gets up to walk away. He starts yelling at her. she does walk out into the parking lot, and he basically kind of like manhandles her.
And then gets into a fist fight
with
Seymour,
who comes to her defense.
Who brings the car over, kind of sees something that's going on. Selma gets in the car, drives off without Minnie, and then comes back, and a fist fight results.
And that's when, then Seymour kind of beats the shit out of him.
Yes.
And then they drive away, and then he drives away with Minnie. And then when you just think like, oh, okay, she's in the hands of this decent guy, they're driving away, and then he starts kind of yelling at her and berating her.
Before we jump onto there's one line that I wrote down that I thought was really interesting. Zelma has a line where he says, "You're very easy to talk to." She hasn't spoken at all.
Well, he mentioned he says something, right? Like, "Oh, you're like such a good listener."
She's such a good listener.
Yeah.
But she hasn't spoken. Like it's just. I mean, it's like it feels like a almost absurdly on the nose commentary about now.
Yes.
I mean, of course, about then too. But it just feels this film. The men in this film are just.
And this is like, well, I mean, obviously, as we said, like, Seymour's already kind of shown to be a dick. Especially in those earlier bar scenes.
But I think his full dickishness is established here when he loses his mind on Minnie because he tries to take her to lunch.
And it turns into like training day. He's like, "You're in the car with me. You're gonna have to fucking go wherever I want to do."
She gets manhandled a lot by this guy.
She does.
Movie.
I also at some point, not to bring in too many different allusions. To use a fancy literary word. Illusion. But I was like, this guy spends like so much time around cars. I literally thought at some point he was like, it'd be really hot if we got into a fucking car accident and then just fucked on the side of the road. I was like, this is gonna turn into crash.
Whoa.
There's cars everywhere, right?
A lot of cars.
Yeah, and I was like, that's interesting. Well, also because the dynamic of it is later on when they're kind of making out and fooling around the car, and the dynamics between them being kind of cloistered within the car, and then kind of him running out. I hadn't thought about that at all. There's a really interesting kind of, I don't know, a lot of shit happens in cars.
A lot of cars. Well, it's also is this the first LA film? No, Too Late Blues is LA.
And Faces has that kind of.
Faces is LA. There's
LA,
less cars. But I wrote down this line. "You don't know beans from Boston," which Seymour says to her when he's berating her in the car. I also wrote down, "The men in this movie are awful." There's a lot of yelling at women.
He just does not stop yelling at her.
No.
So then she asks to be dropped off at the museum, and then there's also that scene where she gets out of the car and then he drives like after her and he almost like runs her over, like he drives up on the sidewalk.
Yeah. So they're in the car. They're fighting. It seems like it's like meet cute.
And
everything just falls apart.
Well, yeah, because he also threatens her. So at some point, he basically says something like, "Oh, if you keep acting this way, I'm going to like punch you out.
I'm going to knock you out."
Yeah,
it's awful.
So she gets dropped off at work.
I wrote down here, who are John Cassavetes' sympathies with, which is kind of a question. Like, are we supposed to feel for Seymour? I think we are ultimately, but it's hard to.
Well, that's what I was. Yeah, that's why I was like really curious how you because. At some point later, when she goes to the diner and he comes to meet her and he's eating the ice cream, she's like, "Oh, I ordered just some ice cream." I literally wrote down like, "God, I hope she poisoned it."
Yeah. Well, so they go back and there's a scene here where I didn't do as good of a job of taking scene notes probably, but he goes to find her and then she keeps he comes to her house, right? And she keeps apologizing to him.
Well,
she's
he
like, "Oh, I'm
asks
so sorry."
her, he says like, "Are you going to apologize to me?"
And it's like,
"What the fuck are you talking about?"
It's like what?
Well, and this is also skipping very, but also, so after he drops her off, he picks up this redhead, this random woman.
Right.
And I'm sorry, I'm calling her the redhead, but I don't think she has a name.
I couldn't find one. I tried to find it.
And they have like this 5-minute scene where clearly he has just dropped off. This is after he's failed, I guess, to try to pick up Minnie.
So he goes, I think she's supposed to be is it implied that she's a prostitute?
Oh, I didn't get that impression, to be honest with you. Because then you see her drop her off the next
It could be a movie conditioning thing where like the door opens and this woman walks in and we're all used to being like, "Oh, that's a prostitute," because like that's how movies often deal with shit like that.
Again, did you see his mustache? Are you going to tell me that mustache would not just pull any woman
that's
a
good point.
I mean, come on.
George is actually growing what I like to call a Moskowitz.
It's going to take 3 months.
How good of a cocktail.
Moskowitz?
I'll have a Moskowitz.
I'll have a Moskowitz.
I'm going to have a Moskowitz. There's no Moskowitz left in my Moskowitz glass.
It's just bitter. It's just battery acid.
We have lost the thread.
So this
woman comes over. She tells him he's like sweet and nice.
And he's actually kind of calm in this scene. He doesn't.
He just
from what I remember, he doesn't berate her.
And they make out a little bit, but we don't know who this person is.
We don't. And then quickly cuts like the next day.
And she's like, sorry, I have to go so early.
He drops her off somewhere.
I think to get her car.
She also has some very interesting things to say about her roommate. She was like, I love eggs, but my roommate hated eggs.
Yeah, it's weird. And then it's the next scene. He goes to Minnie's house.
And he starts banging on her door.
Yeah, and she's like, I'm coming.
And the door opens. They have this kind of, and then yes, he basically says, "Oh, so you're gonna apologize to me?"
And then she goes downstairs and has a moment where she's like thinking.
Yeah,
and that's when she comes back.
Well, it's funny because it's points where she looks. It almost seems like she's looking at the phone. I'm like, call the cops.
Yeah,
please.
He is bad news. So he shows up at her house. They have a fight. She apologizes to him. She tells him men smile too much.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is a great little line.
I forgot. I thought she said something else in the scene that's kind of interesting, or that kind of disarms him. But then they kind of agree to go on this date.
They go on a date.
And this is also great. So this is the first part of the scene, right? Is are they parked somewhere and they're like making out in the car?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's and the Blue Danube Waltz plays, and this is kind of like Cassamovies' like 2001.
Yeah.
Because it also kind of shows the sky and the stars. And they're making out in this truck.
Right.
Which again reminded me of Crash.
Crash. Very unpredictable because we go from like, why does she agree to go on a date with him?
Who the fuck knows? I mean, it's part of the comedy of it all, right? I mean, I think
it's a screwball comedy.
Yeah.
This movie is a screwball comedy with like no blunt edges.
So then Seymour's like, let's go dancing. So they go to someplace.
Right.
They never go inside. So they're parked outside, and she doesn't want to go in. And interestingly enough,
this is a great scene.
Like, oh, I don't want to go in because I don't want to look like a fool. And he's kind of like, why don't you want to look like a fool? Blah blah blah.
Right.
And their dichotomy is really kind of interesting because obviously he's kind of like the free spirit, and she's kind of very reserved and kind of keeps herself, and is kind of worried again about like making a fool of herself. But then she
sort of seems to feel comfortable with him because I feel like she like releases some of that energy in front of him.
Totally. So then they start kind of walking in, and right before that, he does this kind of weird handstand thing where he walks on his.
Yeah. Bringing me back to the fact that Seymour Cassell's other career should have been a fucking stuntman, because that dude's an acrobat.
Maybe he was.
Of the heart, of
course.
Okay, so
much like Jenna Rollins.
Oh God, Jenna Rollins.
They're walking in, and they run into some of her friends or some of her coworkers,
people she may work with.
Yeah,
and she doesn't introduce him, and it's a pretty humiliating moment.
It is, and they walk in. The two of them are still outside, and he's kind of like.
A little bit offended.
He's kind of butthurt, yeah. And then the one guy...
Where did butthurt come from as an expression?
You've never had your butt hurt? Well, it's just universal.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's actually, I think the first usage is in Chaucer.
Oh, right. Yeah. It's actually in Swinburne.
Swinburne?
Butthurt. And lo, I was butthurt. Why did I say it like that?
I was breaking out my Middle English.
Tomorrow creeps in this butthurt from day to day.
But for those of you who are interested in hearing me speak,
Go for it.
Just
can you speak any Middle English?
I'm just going to say, listen to my Middle English podcast.
I think you mean Middle Earth. George has a Tolkien appreciation podcast.
That'd be fucking amazing. I just speak in Elvish.
Elvish.
Elvish or Elvin? Elvish.
Elvin. Elvish. I don't fucking know. Those movies are dumb.
I'm working on my Orcish.
Movies are dumb.
So he's hurt.
They're not dumb. They're great. They're okay.
He's hurt that he wasn't introduced. One of the guys comes back out and is like, "Oh, are you gonna come in, Minnie?" And that's when Seymour leaves. So basically, it's just Minnie and this guy, this colleague, this coworker, whoever the hell he is, and she says to him, "Okay, well, my ride's kind of gone. Can you give me a ride home?" He gives her a ride home, and obviously, of course, Seymour's there waiting for them or waiting for her.
And he confronts them.
Yeah, he confronts them. There's a fight, and this is kind of like, again, I guess where Seymour becomes very, very sympathetic because this guy beats the shit out of him. And she gets. I kind of mixed.
She gets hit. She gets
hit by him by accident,
she faints,
or by Seymour.
I think she gets hit by Seymour. That's what I'm led to believe by the dialogue that follows.
So she gets hit accidentally. This guy's like, "Oh, I'm sorry," but he kind of like...
And he just pieces out.
Yeah, he pieces out. He walks away.
Because he was butthurt.
He was... Well, I thought it was Seymour that was butthurt.
Did I use that correctly in the sentence?
He was more ass hurt. So then they...
Because he's an ass.
He certainly is. Very kind of Don Draper kind of guy. Like suit, tie.
Fred Draper.
Oh, yeah. Very, very, Very good. So then they go back inside, and this is kind of, I guess, when they
fall in love.
This is when they fall in love.
Right.
Again, like almost like magically.
I believe when we fall in love this time, it'll be forever.
You need to edit a lot of this podcast.
Okay. With big trouble.
So then they're inside. He kind of comforts her. They both fall asleep. She wakes up, goes to the diner, right? Is this when she goes to the diner?
Or it's like an ice cream shop.
Yeah.
She says, she sits down and she doesn't order anything, and then she interrupts the waitress and is like, "Excuse me, can I have an ice water or something?" And then she's like, "Oh, and when I tell you I want ice cream to arrive 10 minutes later."
Right.
And it's like, again, interesting because like these characters in this movie are so unpredictable. They do shit you wouldn't expect them to do.
Totally. Yeah. Although I wonder if the diner scene is actually from before, but I think the diner scene actually might be before they go dancing. But anyway, different edits, right? Because she's wearing like that all black.
We fucked up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what happens is they go to his place. They sleep together. They have the scene that's ridiculous in bed.
Well, is that the scene also where he's carrying her up the stairs, which is kind of like really funny?
Yes, he carries her up the stairs.
And she's like asking like ridiculous things, like, "Would you like some eggs?" He's like, "I'm kind of okay."
So our journey through this movie mirrors this movie because it's quite random. I mean, there's a structure to it, but it's quite random in how it delivers. It's the way that the story works out, stuff like that. But yes,
but
they go to the ice cream shop.
In the scene also, well, I guess whatever. Like we're done with that, right? But
yeah.
Yes, I was hoping she'd poison him, but she didn't poison him.
Interesting. Okay.
So fast forward again after the fight. They're again. This is kind of like where they fall in love. But he has this great line where he says, "I think about you so much, I can't go to the bathroom."
They're in her bedroom, right?
I think so.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is where he basically proposes to her, and she kind of says yes. And then they call their moms.
It's a great scene. They call their moms.
Yeah.
I took a note, and in general, that I wrote that like this movie to me defies conventions more radically than Shadows did, because it really just like, I mean, maybe viewing this movie through like the lens of now, it's like so unpredictable and so crazy, and like there's no comparison.
It's hard, and we haven't done justice at his insanity
to Seymour Moskowitz.
And again, just the way in which he yells at her just about the most random shit.
He's angry.
He's
really angry. He's really violent. And like, not to write off that stuff because it's definitely real. And like I said, the edges of it aren't blunt. He's a very sharp, mean guy.
That's what reminds me of Training
But
Day.
it's all kind of coming from this like what seems to me to be like a genuine kind
loneliness.
A genuine kind of, and also an actual. Does he love her? I think he does. I don't know if he knows what that means.
Yeah. So then there's this great. So they call each other's moms, and it's kind of funny over the phone. But then the probably the funniest scene is when they go, everybody meets. Right, the moms kind of fly in or come in. They meet. They have this really awkward dinner. And
I don't think we're doing justice to the way this film cuts, because they're like calling like
the
film. A lot of stuff just happens in media res. Like it cuts. They're on the phone with the parents and they're talking, and all of a sudden, boom! It cuts into at a restaurant, and I believe. Lady Rowlands comes in first.
Yes, Lady
Rowlands. Her name is Lady Rowlands.
They put down the red carpet.
The lady.
The people. The guards come in. Dun, 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 dun.
Yep.
Present to you, the Lady Rowlands.
Hello, I'm butthurt. I'm butthurt that you decided to get married.
Dude, they call it arse hurt there. Come on.
That's correct. I got confused. And then
there's this fucking hilarious scene. But
Sheba Moskowitz.
Yeah.
Steals
the show.
Interesting moment that I want to note about the scene where they're on the phone with Lady Rowlands, with Jenna Rowlands' mother, with Minnie Moore's mother. Yeah. He's like, "Hi, I'm Seymour Moskowitz," and he goes, "Yeah, Jewish."
Oh yeah.
And it's just it stands out. I don't know
because I think like that's what he says, and then he says to her like, "Oh, your mom wants you again," right?
Mm-hmm.
Like clearly she's not happy with it. It seems
and
like.
I don't know if you caught it, but the way the priest marrying them says Moskowitz.
Oh, I didn't.
He goes like,
that.
"Do you take Seymour Moskowitz?" Like it really,
I caught the where he like looks for her name or something.
Yeah, well, he does. Yeah, well, that's
weird.
Which is really great.
Going on? Yeah.
But he really says Moskowitz in this one. It's like,
yeah, no, it is. I mean, yeah, and I guess, but that's also, I guess, is kind of like the interesting thing about how it goes back to what you were saying earlier about like the anti-Semitism in the film, or at least from the character's kind of point of view, isn't something that he like hits you over the head with. Like it's like, yes, it's there, it's obvious, but it's not like didactic and like in a super like like hold on everybody, these characters are very anti-Semites.
Well, he's not really interested in explaining to you, and I
just like with the racism in Shadows, it's obviously there,
right?
But it's not didactic.
But there's the interesting. I've been thinking about this a lot. Like, there's this quality in this. So I think we failed in being clear. Like, this is a very funny movie. Mm-hmm. It's a very manic movie. Its characters, they add up to being people, but they don't necessarily aren't motivated by. They seem to be motivated by like this need for one another and this love for one another. But nothing about the film is like strikingly conventional to me. And I also think that like there's an. How do I put this in a way that doesn't sound like I'm necessarily celebrating this, but there's a kind of quality to this movie that there's a lot of things going on that are socially, culturally reprehensible, in the sense that our main character might be racist. The characters around that main character might be anti-Semitic. They say shit that's uncomfortable. They behave in ways that's troubling. We don't know how we're meant to feel about them, but none of it is telegraphed.
Yeah.
And I feel like it would be hard to get away with that now, because I think we would want I feel like there isn't that level of ambiguity to characterization now in the same way that like I just feel like, you know, we a lot of the time in these movies where we're meant to understand who the good guy is, who the bad guy is, and like whose politics are good and whose politics are bad.
Right.
And those are good things in the sense that like you want art that feels open and that doesn't, you know, I'm not going to go fucking watch Dinesh D'Souza movies, but I think you got to wonder if like John Cassavetes were making movies now and someone were to ask him to explain like, well, what are we supposed to feel about Seymour Moskowitz? He'd be like, fuck you. That's what you're supposed to feel. And I think that like it wouldn't really be an acceptable. I think he would have a lot of trouble in today's media landscape being that kind of art. It's just an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, but I mean, and I thought about that a lot too. But I mean, I think also to some degree, all good artists kind of do that. You know, like I think it's oftentimes where the best art has that kind of like ambiguity to it, or it's not like heavily didactic or heavy-handed.
Do you feel like there's a filmmaker working today that you think of when you think of John Cassavetes, or not even
Snyder a lot? I see a lot of
Michael Bay.
Hey, I didn't go that well this time. You did.
Fuck that.
Just saying that.
Fuck that well.
What the fuck was I gonna say?
No, but really, do you feel like there's anyone that like works in that vein?
In this kind of particular vein?
Not even that it's the same kind of like I'm not interested in Cassavetes knockoffs, Cassamovies knockoffs, but I'm interested in like thinking about, is there anyone that raises this kind of ambiguity that's complicated in this way that I don't know?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean,
that like we don't know what to think.
I did. One of the things that came to my mind actually was the lack of ambiguity in a lot of Spielberg's films. I don't know why that kind of like hit me, but
because I watched The Post last weekend.
Oh, maybe it was because you were texting about The Post, but in particular, just about how much I fucking hate the last 5 minutes of Saving Private Ryan.
Earn this,
yeah.
Earn it.
And, like, we get it, and the movie.
It's very moving, but it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and maybe that's obviously not like.
Do you like Saving Private Ryan?
I think it's two of the greatest scenes ever.
The beginning and the end.
Yeah, and just a whole bunch of crap.
There's some really powerful stuff in that movie, though. Yeah. Like I actually think the Giovanni Ribisi when he's talking about his mom is really, it's very Spielberg, but it's powerful.
No, yeah. And I would definitely recommend that film.
And the scene when the Nazi plunges the knife into
that's part of that.
Jeremy Davies' chest is like...
Not Jeremy Davies.
Oh yeah, that fucking great actor who's not in enough stuff.
Adam Goldberg.
Adam Goldberg.
Right? Yeah.
Holy shit. He makes movies.
He was pretty good. Have you ever seen that Julie Delpy movie he's in? Just kind of funny.
No, I've seen him on Mark Maron's
I think it's
show.
called 2 Days in
I
Paris.
just said the most Liam Billingham sentence ever. I saw Adam Goldberg on Mark Maron.
You saw him on Mark Maron, or did you hear him?
No, he's on the Mark Maron's show on IFC, Maron.
Oh, sorry. Anyway, so then they have this dinner.
I'm so tense.
They have this dinner, and Seymour's mom fucking steals the show because she kind of like berates her own son. She's like, my son's not an Einstein. Like, why would a beautiful girl
marry my son? Look at him.
He's
not a model. So what is it you want to do?
What is it you want to
do, Seymour?
Dude.
Well, I'd like to work at a bigger company, Miss Moore.
But there's also a great line here where the mom's asked, like, how long have you kids been together? And Seymour's like, 4 days. And Jenna Rollins
4 days.
And Jenna Rollins is like a double take. She's like, 4 days.
For a second, you think maybe he's joking because of her reaction to that.
I laughed my ass off.
It's
But it's
great.
true. It is 4 days. We totally also forgot about the stationing. Is that what you call it when you kill a mustache?
He cuts his mustache off.
And the look on her face is priceless.
I wrote down reaction to mustache is amazing.
It is.
Gina Rollins is a genius.
I wrote down. I didn't actually write it down, but I thought about it. I thought about the VH1 with Lenny Kravitz, where he talks about.
What are you talking about?
Can I fucking?
So sorry.
This is the last episode of Who Was. There's a great Lenny Kravitz behind the music where he talks about at the time he had like really, really long hair and he was going through like a lot of bad shit in his life. So there's like this beautiful scene that he sets up where I forgot who it is that cuts his hair, but like he gets his hair cut and he feels like all this like negative energy coming out of his body. And I don't know why, but it reminded me. Yes, of course you have, because you've lived, my friend.
So he cuts his mustache off and it's it's
hilarious.
So we've really butchered the synopsis of this movie, but that's fine. I don't really care that much.
And then it cuts to them getting married. And it's funny, too, because I thought, like, they're not going to get married, but they do get married.
So the last two scenes of this movie, I think, are masterful.
Yeah.
I think they're incredible. So one thing I want to note about the mother scene. You know who's not in the mother scene?
The dads.
The dads.
Yeah.
I think that's a big deal. I think it's important.
Did they say anything about the dads being dead or one of the dads being dead? Does Jenna Rollins...
I don't remember. I don't think so. It doesn't come up. But the absence of dads is interesting, and the absence, particularly of Seymour's dad, is interesting. Also, you know, one thing that we haven't talked about very much is that this film is 1971. Vietnam is going on. There's a lot, you know, a lot that's... there's as much maybe left out of this movie as there's left in, and I think that's interesting. And I think, and in the sense that like there's John Cassavetes thought about like why Seymour Cassell's dad isn't there, and what it means.
So what do you?
And also that these. Well, I think that also like it's interesting that in one of the reviews I read, they compared Seymour Cassell's mom to Portnoy's mom.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Which I have tried to read
around
then. I've tried to read Portnoy's complaint 3 times. Can't do it.
I'm not a big Roth guy.
I thought I'd be, but I haven't gotten an inroad. But there is something. Well, there's something interesting about that. Like, you know, to try describing the character, that like pushy Jewish mom thing, and like I don't know if Seymour Cassell's Jewish, but I don't think John Cassavetes' mother is Jewish. And he casts this woman to play like a caricatured Jewish mom, and it's a little bit just like...
Oh, like you thought like too much like a stereotype?
Yeah, a little bit. But she's still an amazing character. It's cringeworthy, and it has to be.
Well, it's just amazing just how she...
But it also maybe explains why he's such a fucking nightmare of a human being in about 45 seconds.
But it's funny you should say that, too, because at that point I was like, she is, to some degree, the audience's voice. Because it's kind of like, what the fuck does this like beautiful, accomplished woman see in this guy? And it's interesting to kind of read that scene in relationship to what you said earlier about kind of the lack of decent men out there, like the lack of decent men that she finds. So then they get married. Again, there's this kind of awkward wedding scene where I missed it, but the priest mispronounces.
Priest is like
kind of like
Minnie Moore. Do you take Seymour Moskowitz?
But he also has to find her name.
Yeah, and then he's and they start laughing about it. That priest, by the way, is played by a Rowland.
Oh,
yeah, it's like a family affair, and I wonder if
a Rowland.
I wonder.
Lady Rowland.
I wonder if maybe that the laughs that happened there were not scripted.
And
he just fucked up because he's not an actor. And then it cuts to this scene that is an amazing contrast to the scene from the beginning of Husbands.
Yes, very good. Yeah, and
Thank
basically,
you.
Excellent. Well played, sir.
Well, very good. I'm not butt hurt. My butt doesn't hurt. Why am I Stewie Griffin?
So Cool Whip.
So it's not that I want her to die. It's that I want her not to be alive. anymore.
So it's basically kind of a family barbecue.
And they have like 14 kids. We don't know whose kids or
whose.
who's.
There's lots of kids there. We assume obviously some of them belong to them.
But
like
like
a happy
Seymour
scene.
seems like he's happy. He's with his kids. He's
and they're
sort
all
of
like laughing,
dadding out.
and
He's kind of dressed like a tennis player. Like it's just like, but there's suddenly
well,
just
there's money
very
in the car parking business.
It's very there's money in the banana stand.
Ooh, there is.
I didn't want to make Arrested Development reference.
It's fine.
Rip
It's fine.
that shit
up.
And
then and then it ends on this very kind of happy celebratory note.
That's true.
The end. And I did not expect it to go there.
I
guess that's part of it.
I really think that this might be my favorite John Cassavetes movie so far.
Maybe as well.
Love A Child Is Waiting. I know.
Johnny Staccato. Out of a
Johnny
scale,
Staccato.
5 staccatos being the highest, obviously.
How many staccatos is this?
4.5.
So how many staccatos was Husbands? 3?
Oh, maybe 3.5. I forgot how many staccatos I gave it. But Johnny Staccato obviously is a 6. I know it goes beyond the scale.
6 staccatos.
I know that's kind of, it's not fair. But I don't care. Those are my rules.
Well, we really got off track here tonight, but it mirrors the film.
Did we get off or did we
mirrors. What?
No,
it really mirrors the film. It's a really chaotic, crazy film. It's hard to summarize. I love that.
I like how you described it as manic.
Very manic. And I think the thing is that as we get into these, I would say that at the risk of sounding like I know anything, and I don't think I do, we're about to enter this like period of Cassavetes films where like everything is acknowledged as a masterpiece. Like you've got Woman Under the Influence, which is like really an astonishing film, and then you have Killing of a Chinese Bookie, which might be my favorite. There's still Cassavetes films I haven't seen, but then you have Opening Night and Love Streams, and it feels like this is like an interesting. I have no interest in trying to bridge a gap between him and his other films because I'm not interested in trying to think of like, ooh, the trajectory of his career. But you can see him advancing as a filmmaker, and this is it's a really interesting antidote. Like it's like you finish Husbands, and your mouth tastes like tar, and then you eat cotton candy, and it's this movie.
It's
like
a palate cleanser,
but it's a palate cleanser that doesn't lack for like all of the hallmarks of a Cassavetes thing. And I think
there's
also
definitely there's meat on that bone.
But
it's definitely a film worth checking out.
How are you? It's a great movie. How are you feeling about? We've got some stuff coming down the pipeline, George.
We do, yeah.
Next up,
next up is
Woman Under the Influence.
Yeah.
So we'll
and also we're gonna do the Cavett thing.
Yes. So we are
promised.
Well, so that's actually gonna come out before this episode.
Yeah. Sure.
Well, because we're gonna release it after Husband, so we gotta cut that out. George, cut it out. Little family. What's that show called? Don't tap that. Family
Matters.
Family. What's the show?
Steve Urkel.
No.
And the guy from
Full House.
Oh, Full House. Yeah.
Cut it out.
Oh God. Dave Coulier. And on that note,
you got it, dude. Thank you very much for listening.
So, yeah.
Wait, we're gonna add something?
I think is that how we sign off?
I'm Liam Billingham.
And I'm George Rogopoulos.
And this was
Uberbusters.
Okay, yeah. All right. So let's just do it. Let's just go right into it.